This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I am your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest for part two this week is Vinnie Cilurzo of Russian River Brewing. Welcome back, Vinnie.
Thanks.
Again.
Good to be here again.
Yeah, it's been all of a few minutes since we ended the last episode, but we're going to pretend that it's been a whole week. Oh, goodness. As the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on innovative solutions that match their brewing customers' immediate and future needs. G&D backs every project they touch and provides service second to none. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com and tell them Vinnie sent you.
Yep. I love G&D.
You do. Also, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you'd want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. And your 5-barrel system from SS Brewtech is coming and will be here soon.
Yeah,
and,
we're looking forward to it. And we're also going to have Gresser, the same company that built our open top fermenters, build us a little mini 5-barrel open top.
Ooh,
it's going to be this little cute mini me open top that'll be in the pilot brewery down in the restaurant here at the new brewery in Windsor.
That's a great. Let's talk about open fermenting. Okay. But first, you got to talk to me about Simcoe.
Yeah, so we ended the last show on Simcoe. It's near and dear to my heart. I was using Simcoe when it was an experimental YCR 014, which was Yakima Chief Research or Ranches. I don't remember which one it was for the YCR, but was Ranches or Research, but it was Jason Peralt, and he had picked that up from, finished that hop off from Chuck Zimmerman, who was his protege and pretty much taught him everything he knows about breeding. And I talked about CFJ90 in the last episode, and that becoming centennial, where the C, the F, and the J stood for different hop breeders, and the C was for Chuck Zimmerman. So he was a breeder that was a part of the breeding going decades back to a hop like Centennial too. So, Jason learned from the best. But anyways, I would get these packages of experimental hops through my Yakima Chief rep, Gerard Lemons, who is a legend in the hop world, who's now retired and living back in England. And he would say, they're from our research program or from our breeding program. It's just getting started. Our breeder, and I'd say, well, who does this? And he goes, he's a young kid, he would call Jason. And I was young then too. And then I would brew with these experimental hops and things like Warrior and Atanum and Simcoe, and were some of the early ones. And then the promise was that I would then I'd give Gerard growlers back, and he would send them back to Yakima, I think. And so Jason would hear about me, and I would hear about Jason, but we didn't know each other, and now we're very close friends. But Simcoe just knocked my socks off. And we do a beer called Hop To It. It's a single hop beer. That's what we always test new hops through. I'm a big fan of, in a final recipe, Blind Pig, Pliny, Happy Hops. I use a lot of hop varieties. Like Happy Hops is like 9 hop varieties, and Blind Pig is, I think, 6, and Pliny 6 or 7. And I just like that, the layering of the flavors, and that maybe you can't pick out which hop it is, but the sum, makes the total. And Simcoe is just amazing, that really fragrant, at the time they were really pine driven. And it was till years later I found out that you could picked them early for grapefruit and middle for pine and later for pungent. And I didn't realize it until years later, but it became the cornerstone of Pliny the Elder. Yes, there's multiple hop varieties in Pliny, but Simcoe is the main hop. And I really built the recipe around Simcoe. And what a lot of beer drinkers and young brewers don't know is that Simcoe was a hop that almost didn't happen. They planted it and they ripped it all out. And Mike Smith at Loftus Ranches, so Simcoe is owned, the rootstock is owned by the Carpenters, who have Carpenter Ranches, the Peralts, who have Peralt Farms, and the Smiths, who have Loftus. And they own that rootstock. And they ripped all of it out, but maybe like 1 acre, because it wasn't selling. They actually, I remember where they had to throw out like 50,000 pounds of Simcoe because there was no one buying it. I mean, I was using it, and a handful of other brewers were using it. And then when we left Corbel, our original location, and opened up in Santa Rosa in 2004, in downtown Santa Rosa, we made Pliny regular beer. And it's kind of neat. If you look at the growth of Simcoe, it follows the trajectory of the growth of Pliny, or vice versa. And, as much as how important Simcoe is to me, I think Pliny was and is, and I know the Carpenters and the Smiths and Peralts will tell you the same thing. And Natalie and I are really proud of that, because these are American family farms that were really struggling at the time, because the hop industry was not driven by craft.
Right.
It was driven by big breweries who only cared about alpha acid and the lowest price possible. And, whereas craft brewers are like, we don't care about, alpha acid. We want oils and flavor and aroma. In fact, the Hop Quality Group our slogan is it's oils over alpha acid. It's a comment that Dan Carey from New Glarus came up with in that first trip to Yakima when we were building what the organization of what the Hop Quality Group is going to be. And it's really true.
Right.
And so, that was Simcoe. And Simcoe was originally bred to be a bittering hop, and it just wasn't high enough in alpha acid. But Jason was like, oh, man, it has this crazy, amazing aroma. And then we're like, well, let's turn it into an aroma hop. And, that's why you shouldn't look at the old school way of looking at hops saying it's bittering or aroma or multi-purpose. I mean, in my book, every hop is multi-purpose. It can be anything, just the fact that we're using CTZ for dry hopping, and it is classically a bittering hop.
Yeah.
So anyways, but yeah, I love Simcoe's still one of my favorite hops, and really happy that it made it. And it, these farms that were struggling back then, it was really the hop that helped them get over the hump.
That really is a story about craft beer that doesn't necessarily get told enough, that, there is that impact beyond just, the breweries themselves. And, and that agriculture being such a crucial part of it in terms of decommoditizing, the hops that these farms are growing, taking them, past just, how can you maximize alpha, and into looking at even, estate quality, pick timing, and all of these other things. I mean, we take for, brewers talk about that now, but this is still something that's maybe 10 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, at the most, and for such a major $400 million, $500 million a year agricultural industry in the United States, in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, this is a humongous change for, for this agricultural business, and yet, by a lot of sense, we're just in early days with all of this.
Definitely early, because it's, let's not forget, you only get to pick hops once a year.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
So we've done this 10 times now since, craft beer has really taken off. It's a weird way to think about it, but I think you're absolutely right.
I think it's really important, though, for brewers to just don't forget that and be just painfully patient, because it does take time.
So. You mentioned you wanted to see more brewers contract again, and that a lot of the action has been moving to the spot market. What's your drive behind that?
Just that it makes for a more stable industry, and it makes for higher quality hops, because if a small brewer is buying off the spot market, those are the leftover hops. And I'm a firm believer that a high tide floats all boats, and that we need to be all quality driven, and if you're not contracted, you're potentially getting hops that they're not, I don't know if they're bad, but they're certainly not going to be as good as the other ones, because I just feel like the growers have more at stake when everything's contracted, because they know that, we need to fulfill all these contracts, because a lot of growers are grower owners of hop companies. So,
right.
And it just makes for a healthier industry.
Well, it seems like it puts those relationships into more concrete terms, and also, as cementing those relationships, creates a performance incentive on the parts of the grower to keep those relationships, strong, and have them be responsive to the brewers and the brewers' needs in a very, kind of direct manner. Again, that's something that craft has brought about that macro beer never cared about. That direct, feedback from brewers in that loop as it goes back to the growers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about open fermentation. I'm seeing the background photos on your monitors here, and they're of some big open fermenters that you've installed here in this new brewery. As we were taking the tour earlier today, you were fermenting Pliny and even the hoppy beers in some of these big clean rooms with open fermenters. And, that seems a little crazy compared to what most brewers are doing today with their IPAs.
Yeah, what'd you think of that? What'd you think of the yeast sliding down from the open top down into the yeast collector tank that's set into the ground?
I can't wait till I see Natalie's stop motion photo, a time-lapse photo of that you're going to post on social media. It'll probably be out by the time this episode airs.
Actually, it is, because I got a text from Tommy saying
it's already out.
When we were in between the first session and this, he goes, loved the Pliny footage today, or whatever Tommy said. So
well, as soon as we're done talking about it, I can't wait to go see that. It was really fun to watch. It's such a visual thing. From a functional perspective, though, why move fermentation into open fermenters for IPAs?
Yeah, so it's not 100% what we do, but we have open fermentation, and we're using it more and more, and we're getting these incredibly clean flavors from everything we do in open top, whether it's STS Pils or all of our Belgian beers. For a Belgian beer, it's particularly interesting because you're going to ferment really warm typically, and so you can dissipate that heat more easily because there's no lid on the tank, and the tanks are also 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that they're as wide as they are tall, and then there's a hole in the side of the tank that the yeast can come out of. It's natural top cropping, if you will, go down a slide into a yeast collector, and then that yeast can be used you can dump it, or we can use it for future fermentation or propagate. We're also getting any of the trub out of the tank that gets entangled in the foam, because not all of the trub is going to be left behind in the whirlpool, is even as nice of a whirlpool as we have. So you can make a cleaner beer that way and end up with cleaner yeast, even if all the yeast settles to the bottom and we don't top crop it. You get more fermentation byproducts blowing off in an open top fermenter that's a 1-to-1 ratio like ours, because there's more surface area and there's less distance for the CO2 to kind of scrub.
Versus a tall and narrow tank.
The 1-to-3 ratios, or some of those tanks you see at the big breweries that are just like missiles that are 1-to-5 ratio. And so those are all the things. They're nuances, but it to me is a lot like whole cone hops. It's going back. It's taking it back to a traditional way of brewing. Quite frankly, it's a stupid way to spend money. We could have, in the space that we have 10 batches worth of open top OTF, as we say, open top fermenter. We always use the acronym OTF space. We probably could have put in our closed top cellar again, which is 36 or 38 batches worth of beer, come pretty close to that.
Yeah.
So it is a dumb way to
Another
spend
terrible
money,
financial decision, sure.
But it's it's amazing, and what's also it's interesting for the guests, because we set the room at level 1.5. It's our Being John Malkovich floor. So I guess someone listening is going to have to have seen that movie to know what that means.
I'm old enough to know what that means, yes.
Anyways, but we set that floor at 1.5 so you can look down into the tanks and see it. So it becomes very educational for the consumer. And then from the brewing, what's amazing is we've run 6 different yeasts through, and every one of them has a different foam, a different krausen. And it's really cool to watch that and see the difference. And you usually don't get to see that. So,
But even on a sensory side, you mentioned that some of when you put those in front of your sensory team, that they become some of their most favorite batches of some of your classic beers.
Absolutely. And we've had customers come in that like know STS and say, wow, STS is just a little bit cleaner. And, STS is a big Pilsner.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a big Pilsner, but, it still has a Russian River signature to it, but it also has some classic German notes to it. And, even I hear that a lot from brewers that know STS, and it's like there's something different about it. It's cleaner. And so, they're nuanced differences that we're getting. And yet it also helps tell the story of beer. And we've designed this brewery not only to make great beer, but to give an amazing customer experience. And so whether you're on the self-guided tour or the guided tour, if we have wort beer in the open top fermenters, you can see it.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So a lot of experimentation to go in the future too there, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to cover a lot of ground here on the podcast. Let's make a pivot into talking to you about sour beer. Before we do that, great beers are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world to your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. Also, this episode is brought to you by craftbeer.com, bringing you the stories and personalities behind America's small and independent breweries. Okay, what are you going to open for us, Vinny?
Beatification. So our 100% spontaneous fermented beer. And this is from our pub. So this is from Santa Rosa. And so when we make our spontaneous beer, we blend multiple batches of what we call Synambic, which is our spontaneous base beer, and then we make a blend. And we do it. We don't do it traditionally like the Belgians would do to make goose. We'll use multiple batches and make this disproportionate blend. So this has like 8 or 9 batches disproportionately blended in. And we've been doing spontaneous beer since 2006, and which puts us one of the first modern spontaneous brewers in America in modern era. Of course, I'm sure they were spontaneous years ago, but
before they knew what yeast was.
Exactly, yeah. But it took us a long time to figure out like how to tame the acidity. Our early batches of beatification when we started. So batch 1 was not spontaneously fermented, but from batch 2 it was. And batch 1 was a blend, was two barrels. They were old Lafayette barrels that Peter and Lauren gave me from New Belgium, and then from batch 2 on became spontaneous. Before that, the first batch was inoculated. But those early batches were just so acidic, and it just took us time to figure out, how to tame that in a spontaneous manner. And
because the goal isn't just to make overly acidic beer; it's to make a balanced, flavorful approach. How did you ultimately, over generations of this beer, start to tame that acidity?
Yeah, because if you say to a lambic brewer in Belgium, sour beer, it's not sour. I mean, and it's true, lambic goose has an acidity to it, a tartness to it, but it isn't bracingly sour like some of our early batches were.
Right.
And so at the pub, we do a non-traditional process. And I remember something Jean Van Roy told me years ago: you can make spontaneous beer anywhere in the world, but it just may be a different process. And so I embrace that. So we cool the wort. We make a very traditional wort.
Jean Van Roy of
Cantillon, yes. So I think if you say Jean,
I mean, I know what you mean.
I mean, the only other person
he gets a single name like Vinny,
or I mean, you could also think of
Tommy.
I know another Jean in the industry, but anyways, Jean-Marie Roch from formerly of Orval, so he's retired now, but he's right up there in my book with Jean Van Roy. Anyways, but yeah, just that idea that you can do it anywhere, and so I embrace that, and we didn't have a cool ship at the pub in Santa Rosa like we do now here in Windsor. So we built what we call a horny tank, and it's a 20-foot long, 3-foot deep, and about maybe 2 foot wide. So it's this long trough. Quite frankly, it looks like a men's urinal at a ballpark. So I was jokingly, I've said that a million times, so it's not anything I haven't said before. But anyways, we pump wort in that's already been cooled through the cool ship or through the heat exchanger. But we do a traditional recipe, 30 or 35% unmalted wheat. The rest is malted barley. They're aged hops, but we cool it down and then we let it sit overnight in the barrel room, and so it's picking up the bugs that are in that room from previous batches of temptation, supplication, consecration, what have you, and that's what makes it. So controlling the temperature was the first thing. Was just like, well, let's just not pump it in as warm. Let's let it be cooler. The time, so that's something we're really hyper focused on down there at the pub, is how much time it's spent in the horny tank and what temperature. And then once we brought the temperature down low enough, because I was worried that if I brought it down too much, no bugs would.
So what temperature are you bringing it in at?
A very conventional 68 Fahrenheit. And
so is that just slowing down the lactic acid producing bacteria, which tend to work, faster at higher temperatures?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And so in the past, really what we were doing was just making this highly acidic lactic, and eventually some PDO, and Brett would work in. And we did a study once with a lab in Napa, and we ended up with 17 different microorganisms in Sonambic brewed at the pub. So it wasn't like it was just simple Brett lacto, PDO, and some sac, and that was it. There was all kinds of craziness in there. And now we're starting a program here in Windsor with the same thing. And so by adjusting the temperature down, that and sometimes we go lower than that, is we'll sometimes do a spontaneous beer during the summer and see what we get. We know that there is more bugs and critters in the air at that time, so we will go cooler than that 68. But 68 ends up being, it's 64 to 68 is where we live. Whereas now we've got this new old school traditional cool ship, and we open the windows and the cool air comes in and it cools it down. And then the next day we go to the barrels. And then about a week after that, we'll see fermentation. But it's been fun having a clean slate in Windsor.
So you're saying now at the new brewery here in Windsor, you actually are using a more traditional cool it in the cool ship process, because you can kind of manage how, the speed at which that cools.
Yeah, and we wanted to, we knew we weren't going to walk away from our spontaneous beer in Santa Rosa. We're still, in the future, the blends are going to come from both breweries, because I love what we're making there. And like what we're drinking now, it's not acidic. It's not like this acid bomb like they used to be. It's tart. But there's all these complexities of flavors of Brett and funk and earthiness and cellar mustiness, and this is a pretty young bottle. It's only, I think, last year, so it's a year and a half, a year and a quarter old now.
Well, when it comes
in the bottle,
right? When it comes to the history of sour beer and goose in particular, it's a beer made by blending. And historically, traditionally, it's been made by brewers blending other brewers' wort into their own in order to achieve the flavor that they're looking for. It seems like you can kind of accomplish a similar thing, but even with your own stock brewed at different places between here and then the Santa Rosa brew pub.
That's the goal. Yeah. And yet when we make temptation, supplication, consecration, or our new intinction beers where we're putting grapes in the beer, those are by the batch. Like, it always surprises other brewers when I bring them and tour and they ask about those beers, and it's like, what, temptation, it's by the batch. If there's 64 wine barrels in this batch, all 64 go into the blend unless there's acetic. And if there's acetic, then it goes down the drain and we get rid of the barrel.
Right.
And we never reuse a barrel that's been acetic. Like this morning, I emptied supplication barrels, and there was unfortunately one bad barrel that was acetic.
You did? So Vinnie Cilurzo went down to the funky brew house and emptied, debarreled.
I do.
All right.
And I still do all that myself. So yeah. And we have our own process. Like
anyone else out there in the brewing world who thinks they're too important, take a lesson.
It's my favorite thing to do is the barrels. Yeah. And we have our own process of emptying barrels that some other breweries have taken our lead on. Like, if you look at the head of our barrels, there's a nail. That's how we get a sample out. So that you want to use a wine thief to break the pellicle.
Right, the old Vinnie nail.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
and then there's a cork down at 6 o'clock. That's
okay.
basically an unused beer cork that we would normally go into our bottles for the sparkling wine, champagne style cork, and that's how we remove the liquid, the beer from the vessel, from the barrel with fruit in it, and then it goes. We pull the cork out, jam a tube in, a 15/16 OD tube. The tube goes down to a strainer, and then we strain the fruit out, and then from there it's pumped. An average typical brewer would look at that and say, "Oh my God, you're exposing it to oxygen." It's like, yeah, I am for like 5 minutes, but this beer has been exposed to oxygen via micro-oxygenation through the wood for the last year to 3 years. And if you know anything about winemaking, a little bit of exposure to air at that, pH levels or acid levels isn't that big of a deal. So anyways, we have this process we use to empty barrels, and but like our conventional barrel aged beers aren't blends. They're batch brews, and we're trying to make them like a regular conventional beer, where hopefully supplication that you drink, last month or last year, let's say, is the same, or you're going to get close to what it is now.
Yeah.
Whereas making beatification is a blend, and it really falls back on those roots. And so, because we do maybe one blend a year, 2 at the most. I still feel like a novice as a blender, period, hands down. Even Jean Van Roy at Cantillon, he's been doing it since he was a kid, and yet he still is learning. And I remember him telling me that a couple years ago, and I was like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. How do hops play into this? I know a lot of sour beer brewers in America have been pushing towards using more aged hops, embracing that kind of, cheesy flavor, but low alpha acid, but still an acid component, which can have a preservative quality and inhibit some of that bacterial growth in order to also keep that acidity down. Does that figure into your process, or are you really just working with temperature?
Yeah, no, I've been using aged hops since 2004 in our beers, and I got some aged hops from Yakima, or from Hop Union back in 2004, 2005, and started using them immediately. They had some hops that were already aged, and so I knew about aged hops, obviously, from Belgium. But,
sure.
And that was right when we started in 2006 making our first spontaneous beer. So that was probably in 2006 was probably really when we started using them. And so they've always been a part of it. And even Temptation, Supplication, Consecration, and our other barrel-aged beers, those all get aged hops. So we have like 10,000 pounds of aged hops on site, both in pellet and whole cone format.
Yeah.
And so I'm always buying up hops. And at one point, I've had breweries give them to me. Like, I got these old hops, and I'm like, I'll take them, So I love the flavor that they contribute.
Yeah.
I don't need to go into the science of it. I think most people listening probably know about, why you use aged hops, and that the alpha acids have dropped, and yet the beta acids are still hanging there, and there's a preserving effect, right, and whatnot. And so for all those reasons, I'm a traditionalist in a lot of ways. If you listen to the last episode, and I'm talking about whole cone hops, and then we just talked about open top fermentation, and like, I love the tradition of the recipe of making a spontaneous fermented beer, but the process is where I love that we've deviated from it at the pub, and yet now we've got this traditional thing going here, and we are doing it in both ways, if you will, a non-traditional and a very traditional way. Our cool ship here is 13-foot square, and we put 10 inches of liquid of wort in it, and the top of the tank is at the bottom of the windowsill, and we looked back to Jean de Clercq's brewing books and actually found some writings about cool ships, and so it's kind of a mix of old world tradition, but open-minded craft beer innovation and not being so pigeonholed into the past.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the other beers on that sour side and some of the ways that you have, developed some more interesting or unique techniques for some of these. You've been using wine barrels and you're using fruit in a number of your beers. How are you getting great results out of some of these blending fruits or macerating beer on fruit? And what have you learned through those kinds of processes?
Yeah, so for our three main barrel beers are temptation, supplication, and consecration. And the backbone of these beers is something that when I started making these beers, the only other breweries that I knew personally that were making them were New Belgium. Peter was the first American sour beer I had been exposed to. I'm sure there was someone making barrel-aged beer before La Folie, but that's what I was exposed to. And then Tommy, at the time, it was before Lost Abbey was developed. He was doing these beers in the back of Pizza Port. And so Tommy and I kind of learned together. And Peter was always gracious enough to give us just a little nibble of information, but not enough. And I think Lauren always talks about that too, about how
so Belgian.
Yeah. So which was great because I didn't want to copy them.
Sure.
And nor did I want to. Tommy and I didn't want our beers to taste the same. And we're in the middle of wine country. It just made sense to start pairing wine barrels with a specific recipe, and not just like taking a beer that we brew normally and add to a barrel. It was like, let's actually develop a recipe around the beer. So supplication. I love Pinot Noir. Natalie and I drink a lot of Pinot at home, so I love that. And I love the cherry note. So it's like, okay, well, let's make a beer that's fermented warmer so that you get a lot of ester profile. But then we're adding cherries into it. But we don't want cherry to be the main star. We just want it to be one component of it. And then it was like, well, my goal is to make these year round. And eventually consecration came along. Like, well, geez, how can we do that, with fresh fruit and do it consistently? And it's like, well, dried fruit. And there's really good dried fruit out there. So that's why supplication and consecration are both made using dried fruit. Consecration with currants and supplication with dried cherries. And so it gives us the ability to make them year round. And it's funny.
It has to pose some interesting challenges in addition to the flexibility that gives in terms of like maximizing the kind of extraction from something that's dehydrated like that.
Takes a lot longer because if you think about the beer has to penetrate the fruit, and on a soft skin fruit that's fresh, let's say raspberries or something like that. Cherries takes a little bit longer, but like raspberries, we often in the past have done a charity beer called Framboise for a Cure, and 2 pounds of fruit per gallon, and it's amazing. So that one we barrel age, and the beer gets funky and a little bit sour ahead of time, and then we put it on the fruit. It only takes like 3 weeks on the fruit. It'll extract everything out of the fruit, and if there's a big enough Brett culture, it'll ferment through those sugars. So we're not on the fruit that long. And that's something I learned from some Belgian brewers. It was, I saw that and was like, ooh, that's a great idea, but that would never work for dried fruit. So we have a beer compunction that we use pluots on, and we're doing these grape beers now, some with juice, some with the actual grapes themselves, and so those can be a lot quicker. So the fruit, for the dried fruit, those actually go into the barrel, whereas a lot of the fresh fruit stuff that we do at the summertime, those go into stainless steel tanks for a short period of time, and it's like in and out, and we can turn them quite a bit faster because of that. And you have a very short season, a small window there. So the more of these fresh fruit beers that we do, whether it's raspberries, pluots, Sauvignon Blanc grapes, Merlot grapes, we need to be very focused on the tanks and how are we going to fit them all through. It's just like a picking window for a hop grower.
For something like raspberries, are you freezing them first, or are you using them straight fresh? I know some brewers love to break those cell walls down by running them through a kind of a freeze thaw process. But
we get them in and we add them right away. And one of the funnier stories was for compunction, the Pluot beer. I called the local fruit purveyor, and he gets them from the valley, not too far from here, and they come in, and it was like 500 pounds of Pluots, pretty good amount. And every one of them had a sticker on the fruit. So not only did we have to have the fruit open, we had to peel the sticker off. So poor compunction has always been a redheaded stepchild.
Okay.
So.
I've noticed over the last, 5-6 years that consumer preferences have shifted a bit when it comes to sour and acidic beer. The kind of darker brown Flanders style, sours have seemed to kind of given way to more lighter body, blonde, pale kind of sours in terms of consumer preference. How has that impacted the beers that you make, knowing that some of yours like Consecration are definitely on that kind of brown sour kind of base.
Yeah, and Consecration's a 10% beer.
Yeah.
So it's something that we've definitely seen. What we have noticed is that it's more on the bottle side, and draft is still held pretty strong. And so even as, bottle sales has softened for, funky, dark brown beer, we're doing okay draft wise. And so we've had to just shift some of the, the sales from bottle to draft. But we weren't in the position to also make any new beers.
Right.
So we just kept making Temptation, Supplication, Consecration, then a few one-offs like Compunction and Framboise. And so it really hasn't affected us, but I've seen it for sure. And I'm, how would you really know this? But I do think that the simpler kettle sour beers have cut into barrel-aged beers, and whether it's for price or if it's because there's just so many more brewers making, barrel-aged beers now, and that market is still a pretty niche market. But it also means that we need to just work a little bit harder. So when I toured you through the brewery, we tasted Intinction Sauvignon Blanc, which is a Pilsner aged in Sauvignon Blanc barrels with Sauvignon Blanc juice added. And I just opened and poured you Intinction Merlot. And both these beers are not released yet, but Intinction Sauvignon Blanc will be out in the next month or so. And then Intinction Merlot is this beer that we have in our glass now that's got an amazing, beautiful red, looks like a rosé, and the flavor, it has the tannins. Mm-hmm. And so, the change in market just means that we need to be more creative in what we do. And so the idea is to do this line of beers under the Intinction label that are different grapes. So we started with Sauvignon Blanc and now Merlot. And so instead of just being focused on our three core, barrel-aged beers, it's being proactive and trying new stuff and bringing Framboise back, whether it'll be this year or next year, depending on how much, beer we have.
Yeah.
But that's it.
It seems like making grape, wine beer type hybrids using wine grapes would be a natural for you right here in wine country in California. Like not just that, but you also have plenty of friends who are winemakers in this area with great quality grapes, and have a little more of a reason to want to work with you because of who you are and where you are. What took you so long to get here, and then the more important question. What have you found, and how do you make decisions about how you process these grapes and how you select them in order to, and then build a grist bill and an approach towards, a foundation, because when you start brewing with wine grapes, you are talking about definitely higher alcohol levels. Those grapes are highly fermentable, and so there's a different strategy in designing a beer around that. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think like the question about how we process the grapes for the Intinction Merlot that we have in our glass right now is a perfect lead into this beer, because the way that we did it was I used a winemaking technique called carbonic maceration, and that is there's a style of wine called Nouveau. It's typically with the Beaujolais grape, and it's released on the third Thursday of November every year in France. And it's a very traditional wine where you whole cluster ferment, including on the stem.
Yeah.
And then you add the yeast, and literally you have like thousands of fermentations going on in every berry. So for Intinction Merlot, I was hoping to get some of the tannins, which you definitely taste in the beer, but that meant that I actually wanted less bitterness in the beer. So mostly this beer is using a Sinambic base. And actually, the recipe is all Sinambic base. It's just some of it is spontaneously fermented. Some of it is the Sinambic recipe using all aged hops, so no alpha acid or very little alpha acid, but maybe fermented with Saccharomyces. So, but the basis is that there is very little bitterness in this beer. And then we had our neighbors at Grand Cru behind us here. I mean, that's one of the great things about being in wine country.
Sure.
We have a custom crush facility literally 200 feet, so a quick forklift drive away out of our back gate.
Yeah.
I can have grapes delivered there, and they'll process them however I want. So for the Intinction Merlot, we had them destem the grapes, but that was it. They weren't pressed, they weren't crushed or pressed. And then they put them into a micro bin. I brought them back. We put them into the barrels with the beer because all of our stainless tanks were full. And so the idea was to do this whole berry carbonic maceration process where you end up with a really pretty color because eventually the grapes do explode, but you get a lot less tannins through a whole berry fermentation like that using the exact same winemaking techniques for the same reasons of why you would do carbonic maceration. And that's a technique often used in wineries too. Like in Pinot Noir production, a lot of wineries will go like 10 or 20% whole berry or whole cluster. Maybe they destem them to accentuate the fruitiness in a wine, whether it's Pinot or whatever. Typically it's used in Pinot. And so, that's employing a winemaking technique directly to make these beers.
On the Sauvignon Blanc, how is there a different process for that?
Yeah, for that one, we actually we work with an old grape growing family here in Sonoma County, Dutton, and Dutton's used to grow hops here, which is really cool because this used to be a hop growing region. But for that, we we crush the grapes and then press them, and then get the juice delivered to us. So that's just juice, Sauvignon Blanc grape juice, so no skins or anything. So totally different than the Merlot, where we're just blending the juice in. So for that, we make the Pilsner, barrel age it, and then empty the barrels, blend it with the Sauvignon Blanc juice, put it back into barrels to finish the fermentation, and then eventually package it. And there's no bacteria in the Sauvignon Blanc intinction. All the acidity is just from the grape juice itself, but you do end up with like 8.25%, 8.5% alcohol beer because it's so fermentable. And and there we're a small. So
you're barrel aging it, but it's barrel aging in a straight wine barrel, just no bacterial impact.
There's Brettanomyces, but no lacto,
okay.
no PDO, and it's a few different strains. And again, one of the benefits of being in wine country is we have access to some not commercially available strains of Brett that we can use, and so that's one of the beers.
You have
that we
access to not. How's that happen?
Yeah, there's wine labs in the area that are paid to basically tell a winery if their wine has Brett, and then they collect the Brett. And one in particular knows exactly what I'm looking for in Brettanomyces. So when you look at Brett,
that is fascinating. So these labs that are trying to find the stuff that the winemakers don't want in there are culturing this Brett.
Oh, they collect it,
and they just know that you're interested in these things.
Yeah, and so when you look at Brett,
sure.
You typically characterize it in 4-ethyl guaiacol 4-EG or 4-ethyl phenol 4-EP. And 4-EP, 4-ethyl, the phenol type is more of the the bad Brett, the polluting Brett. It's Goodyear tire, rubbery, Band-Aid, and so that's the 4-ethyl phenol. The 4-ethyl guaiacol is the nicer Brett. That's the spicier notes. Like even in a German Hefeweizen, that spiciness you get, that's part of that is 4-ethyl guaiacol. And so that's good Brett. And so they're always looking for.
So how do they know? I mean, are they you can't really tell that from just looking at cell morphology at that point,
yeah,
right?
they've got they've got technology in their labs that they can pick out whether it's 4EG or 4EP. But
is this like DNA testing of some sort? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the hard thing about Brett, though, and those are the
You've got some nice friends, Vinny.
Those are the two main flavor components, if you will. But there's all these other different phenols that Brett makes, and it's not black and white to say that 4-ethyl guaiacol won't make anything that 4-ethyl phenol will.
Yeah.
And I'm only using the two main ones because they're the more generic ones, if you can call Brett generic. But everything has a crossover to it, and it lays on each other. So you like I said, you just can't say that, well, 4-ethyl guaiacol isn't going to have a little bit of Band-Aid. It might, but it has less. And anyway, so we find these strains and then find the right fit for them. And then it doesn't hurt that we make 100% Brett fermented beer. So we can sometimes use that as a little bit of an incubator to test some different stuff out.
I guess you are stashing these away and then grow them up. You do that internally, or do you have folks do that for you?
We for some of these unique strains of Brett, they'll start them for us at the local lab, and then we'll finish it ourselves. Yeah. Because it's and then but we still buy lots of commercial, strains from some of the more well-known yeast companies for sure. Like the conventional sanctification, the 100% Brett beer we make, that's all Brett strains that you can just buy from, any or all of the main yeast suppliers in the craft
Do you do
industry.
small batches with them just to test them and see how what flavor impacts are before you go prime time with them, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We will. We have a little homebrew system that we still use, and for instance, the lab that I'm thinking of, they want us to make a batch of sanctification with one particular strain that the microbiologist has in mind, but he wants us to ferment it cold like a lager, and he's like so focused on that, and I'm so excited to do it at some point, but. They don't have the capabilities to grow, mind you, this isn't a lab that grows yeast like we think of a conventional lab for a craft brewery. They're there for different reasons. And so they can grow a little bit of yeast, and I'm not going to put Brett in our yeast propagation, in the clean brewery here.
It's probably not a good idea.
So getting enough Brett to make a 75 barrel batch of cold fermented is difficult for both of us. So, it might be something that needs to wait till we have our pilot brewery. And, I talked about it in the last episode about just being patient.
Right.
And that's one of those things, like if this takes a couple years to get to this point, I kind of like that because it gives me something to look forward to.
Well, at least you haven't lost that sense of exploring and trying new things.
No, our kind of my core team that I work with directly, our production manager, our lead brewer, our head in the lab, so Steven, Zach, and Taylor, we meet weekly, and sometimes, and Eric, our head in packaging, they look at me sometimes like, where did you come up with that idea? That is a harebrained idea, but no, that's going to be pretty fun to execute.
What other crazy ideas have you come up with lately?
Well, the from the last episode, mixing hops with the Guth. I mean, that was they were like, you did what? You built an outlet on the side of the tank to mix. I've got an idea to put a dry hop vessel on the top of every fermenter so that we can dry hop without degassing the tank. So it would be like a hop cannon reservoir.
So you keep it under a little bit of pressure then?
So it would be under pressure so that we can bung our tanks, have all natural CO2, but then open a valve, the hops drop in, and it's all done under pressure. So that's something we'll get to eventually, because all of our fermenters here are 2-bar. so that we can bung tanks and have fully naturally carbonated beer. So it's something that we want to work towards. We're still force carbonating.
Well,
most
wouldn't
of our
that
beer.
impact your hops creep, though, Vinny?
I'm not sure. I'll let you know next episode.
I'll hold you to that. Hold you to that. What else, in terms of, your sour beer process, have you been excited about lately? And, what other, things have you learned over the last year, especially as you've, brought things back up to speed here? Because you had to pretty much, shut down your sour beer production, move everything over here to this new production brewery, and then restart everything again, or pull stuff out of the barrels as you already brewed. Have you learned any new lessons?
One of the nice things about building the brewery from scratch is that you hopefully do everything exactly the way you want. And although our barrel room at the old production brewery, where the bulk of our barrel beers were done, was climate controlled, it was marginal. So to have a true a barrel room that when I want it at 58 degrees, it's actually 58 degrees and it's not 62, because that's where a lot of acetic acid gets produced. Is the beer just gets a little too warm.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like all the way to the balsamic vinegar, but just tiny nuances in the back of your palate. And I'm excited that we have that. And ironically, it's tied into the G&D chiller, because our barrel room and our main cold box are actually glycol chilled, so it's not a Freon system.
Yeah.
So we built the chiller big enough to be able to cool what you saw. It's a pretty substantial size barrel room that we have 1,000 wine barrels in now, and several foeders, and can add a lot more. But then it also we cool our main cold box with glycol also, but. That's big, and to me, slowing the process down is really great, because it takes longer to make these beers, but the acidity is so much softer, and we saw that years ago at Ferdinand Court, and then we piled more barrels in and really didn't have a means to add any more refrigeration, and so the temperature did go up a little bit, and there were seasonal times of the year when beers would probably gain more acidity than I probably wanted. And so I'm really excited about temperature, which seems so basic, but I think brewers forget just how important that is when you're making barrel aged funky beer. That temperature is everything, and just organization. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff is less about the true brewing process, but like just how organized the barrel room is. And there's a row for the barrel ladder that makes it really easy for Al, our funky brewer, to get up. And I call it bung patrol, just going up the ladder weekly and checking every barrel that the bung hasn't popped out. Because if the bung pops out, which happens every once in a while, more than a couple days, that barrel's going to go acetic. And so having space and elbow room, we're using foeders for the first time.
Really?
That's pretty exciting. I'm still 100%, I still believe barrels are a better way to go, at least for me, because I like that you have more small vessels. And when I emptied the barrels this morning, every one tastes different, and I taste every barrel. And for me, instead of doing a reserve program, we blend the exceptional barrels in with the good barrels and make a blended product. And if it's bad, of course, we dump it. But, that's fun, because you have these individual, vessels making beer. And then, if we typically have it from Ferdinand Court, it would be 56 wine barrels is about 100 beer barrels of beer. And so if that was in a foeder, that would only be one character. Yeah. And whereas with small barrels, but I do also recognize that foeders give you the ability to make large volumes. And Natalie keeps telling me to stop buying them, but I just bought 4 more actually. But again, we're in wine country, and we have these wineries that are coming to us saying, "Hey, we have this oval foeder, we've got this and that." It's like, how can you pass it up? But we need the space too, because I think a part of, us moving forward with our funky beers is having diverse and not just making temptation, supplication, and consecration. In fact, we may need to pull back on those to be able to make more,
Right.
to give the consumer a wider choice to pick from.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have to create some new beers to make in those fooders that are suited for those fooders.
And for us, it's most of those will be fruit beers, and it's just being able to make volumes of a base beer that can express the fruit of this or that.
Yeah,
and they're all different, sizes of fooders, from 20 barrels up to 150 barrels of beer.
For a home brewer out there that's venturing into making some traditional sour beers, what should they pay the most attention to?
Well, if you want to make something that's got almost a Rodenbach type character with a little bit of that acetic quality, you can half fill a barrel or whatnot. But I'm a huge fan of having really clean, or as clean of sour beer as possible. And so topping your barrels is we top our barrels not monthly or anything, but we'll top our barrels at least once. And you can make funky beer at home, but it's a lot harder. And I always suggest to get a bunch of homebrewers together and do a barrel, because one thing that's often overlooked is the stave thickness. So if you have a 5 or 10 gallon wine barrel, and you can find them pretty easily now,
right.
But that stave for that 5 or 10 gallon barrel is so much thinner than a stave on a 50 or 60 gallon, wine barrel, conventional wine barrel, that you're going to have so much more micro-oxygenation happening that you're going to end up with something that's a lot more acidic.
Right.
And so that's something that is often overlooked on the homebrew side, and is probably, in some cases, you need to come up with some hybrid process. Maybe you're pulling the beer out of the barrel sooner and then just going to stainless or a carboy or whatever.
Right.
And also don't forget that plastic is porous as well.
Right.
And years ago, I don't know if it was in Jeff Sparrow's book, where he has the porousness. I think it's in Wild Brews, Jeff Sparrow's book, and he has that, and he shows, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but plastic can be just as oxidizing to a beer over a long period. So figuring out this hybrid process to be clean, and that just may be half barrel, half stainless for an example. So.
You mentioned Lauren Limbach of New Belgium earlier on the podcast, and you also hinted at having a fun story.
I did.
Before we close, you want to share that with me?
Yeah, so I'm staring at a bottle of Beatification, the first beer we had, and I briefly mentioned when we were talking about our spontaneous program that we, the first time we made Beatification, it was not spontaneously fermented. And so Peter Buchart, who was at New Belgium at the time, told Tommy and I that he had 20 old La Folie barrels that he was going to give us. And then I said, well, great, we'll ship them to me, and then I'll take the 10 and ship them down to Tommy to make it easy on you. So in the end, Peter only had 4 wine barrels that he shipped us, because all the employees took them and turned them into planters. So I just randomly kept 2 and then sent 2 to Tommy, and I put a blonde base beer in them or whatever, and it was aging for some time. And then Lauren was up, I think, at a class at UC Davis and visiting Natalie and I, and she goes, oh, can I see the barrels? We take her into the barrel room at the pub, and she looks at the barrel, and she's literally cursing Peter out and crying at the same time, as she's also saying, oh my God, it's pH 1. And pH 1, they had pH 1 through pH 10, and they were the original La Folie barrels, and like the best. And as it turned out, Peter gave most of them away. That's why she was
some of
cursing.
Our planters right now.
That's why she was cursing Peter. But then she was crying because pH 1 was the golden child. And if you could, had a favorite barrel, that was it. And so she was also at the same time so happy that it didn't actually get turned into a planter. So I opted to take the 2 barrels and bottle them separately. So there was beatification batch 1, and then there was beatification batch 1-PH1. And then just like on the Pliny label, where it's like drink fresh, do not age, blah, blah, blah. I told the story of Lauren coming and visiting us on PH1 bottle. And just as a quick follow-up to that, PH1 was the inspiration for the Rare Barrels name.
Yeah,
and so the Rare Barrel is named after technically a barrel, PH1. And so now PH1 has been sent around, and it's almost like, have you ever seen the movie The Red Violin?
Yeah.
It's about this violin.
Sure.
It's an amazing movie.
Now PH1 is back with Peter now at
and
Purpose.
Peter has it now at Purpose.
Yeah.
And it was, we've had it twice, and it was at the Rare Barrel. It's been at New Belgium twice.
For sure.
And so my hope is that it
I popped over there the day when they were blending that first Rare Barrel New Belgium edition of PH1.
Yeah. I hope that barrel continues to get passed around to our friends in the craft industry, and it's definitely rode hard and put away wet, I guess is the term, but it's a great barrel, and it has such a story behind it from everyone who's touched it, and I hope more breweries touch it along the way.
Well, that speaks to the collegiality and general feel of craft beer, and it's wonderful to see creative brewers doing things together, helping each other out. And, that inspiration goes both ways. You've inspired a whole bunch of folks, and I know a whole bunch of folks are continuing to inspire you, in due turn. So
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yep, of course. This was fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate you visiting us in Windsor.
It's been fun to get up here and see it. And I don't know what took me so long.
Yeah.
But now getting to see it here, in person and experience it, has been fantastic. Everyone should make a trip up here to Windsor and visit the brewery. And you should drink as much of this intinction with Merlot grapes as you possibly can. Because
once we release it.
Once you release it, because this is fantastic.
Thanks.
And I'm going to drink as much as I can before I go to sleep tonight. Thank you to G&D Chiller, the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Thank you to SS Brewtech, who's advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality. Thank you to BSG and Bring the World Your Brew House with select ingredients from BSG. And thank you to craftbeer.com that brings you the stories and personalities behind America's small and independent breweries. Vinnie Cilurzo, Russian River, thanks for joining me.
Thanks. Appreciate the time. It was fun.
Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.